Hello and welcome to our Rethink Live panel discussion, How to Accelerate Our Journey to Net Zero Buildings, brought to you by Danfoss. We've invited three topic experts to share their expertise and view with us the role of smart HVAC technology in the journey to net zero buildings. My name is Michael Kellerman, Director of Business Development at Danfoss, and I have the pleasure to moderate today's discussion. And for our viewers, feel free to be part of the dialogue as well by dropping your questions into the Q&A box on this On24 platform. We'll take those questions throughout the session, and then we'll try to answer some of those at the end. So Jenna Cramer is our first panelist today, and she's the president and CEO of the Green Building Alliance. Green Building Alliance is an independent nonprofit organization and one of the oldest regional green building organizations in the United States. So welcome, Jenna. Can you give us a little bit about yourself and about the Green Building Alliance?
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much for having me here today. I very much admire the work of Danfoss and excited to be next to colleagues talking about one of my favorite topics. My name is Jenna. I'm based out of Pittsburgh, from Pittsburgh, work throughout the region on, one of my biggest passions, I think my whole life was creating quality places for people. And the interaction of people in place, and definitely net zero buildings fall in line with that. So Green Building Alliance, we are celebrating our 30th year this year.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's very exciting. As you mentioned, we were the first regional green building organization in the country. And our work is to positively transform the world through the built environment to create a healthy, just, and resilient future for everyone.
Excellent.
We realize the built environment has the biggest contribution to climate change, but also to social equity, to human health, and creating thriving economies. So we work throughout the region. We have strategic partnerships across the country and even across the world through a partnership with the United Nations. So very, very excited to be here.
Excellent. Well, you're definitely on the front lines of green buildings and net zero. So we look forward to your input today.
Thanks.
Our second panelist is Vikas Anand, Regional Vice President at Danfoss. So Vikas, welcome. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Danfoss?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And thank you, Jenna, for being here. I think with your background and expertise, I think we all can learn about what your association that's doing. My name is Vikas Anand. From a background perspective, I'm an international sales and marketing professional with over 25 years of experience in emerging and mature markets. I have an extensive background and interest in energy efficient solutions and carbon neutral technologies that help address some of the world's toughest challenges linked to the global mega trends that we are facing. Currently, I'm in the role of Vice President North America for Danfoss Climate Solutions, where I lead the North American sales, applications, and operations teams that helps to work with the customers in providing energy efficient solutions and in the areas of buildings, cold chain, infrastructure, and industrial applications. So look forward to the dialogue, and looking forward to learn as well myself.
Excellent. Thank you, Vikas, and we look forward to your input on today's discussion. And then our third panelist, Victor Marinich, Global Strategy Director of Commercial Buildings at Danfoss. Vic, you want to tell us a little about yourself and your role at Danfoss?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. So again, I'm Vic Marinich. I'm located here in our Baltimore office, and I'm currently part of our strategic marketing team. I've been a longtime Danfoss employee, and I've spent most of my career actually more on the air conditioning side of things. So working a lot with our customers on designing and developing the most efficient systems that we can, right? Chillers and heat pumps and VRF units and residential units and so on. And so working a lot on refrigerant transition issues, on meeting the new SEER 2 requirements and doing a lot of those things. But beginning of this year, I transitioned over to taking the lead role of being responsible for our global commercial building strategy. And so I think that's something really interesting, because now it's looking at all those units we helped design in the past, chillers, heat pumps, rooftops, and then really applying them into the entire commercial building envelope and making sure, right, that not just each individual component is running as it should, but making that whole system work and sing together much better. So I really look forward to the discussion today as well. So thanks,
excellent.
Mike.
Yeah. So you're right out there with our customers. So hopefully bring some insight on the challenges, needs, and solutions that they're looking for.
And we've got them. So yeah.
All right. Well, together with our three panelists, we want to assess where we are today with energy efficiency in our buildings and discuss those challenges and opportunities ahead. The panelists can each bring their own experiences, which they have, and so I think today will be quite insightful. But our first session today called How to Accelerate Our Journey to Net Zero Buildings. The question is, what does that mean? Net zero buildings. And when we talk about that, I think we've heard a couple different references to that. Sometimes we talk about net zero energy buildings, and at other times we talk about net zero carbon buildings. And so I guess the gold standard would be a net zero carbon building. But in most buildings today, a lot of the focus still is on energy efficiency. Moving forward, I want to give a little bit of context as to why we're having this discussion and why the topic is so crucial. Globally, according to the IEA, International Energy Agency, buildings are responsible for roughly 37% of greenhouse gas emissions. And if we dig inside of that, 28% of that is operational emissions, with the other 11% being materials and construction. So with the Paris climate goals in mind, there can't be any doubt that we need to decarbonize our buildings in order to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. Global building space is projected to double by 2060. Currently, only about 3% of investments in new construction is green and efficient. And if we look at building innovations or renovations, that's even lower at barely 1%. So in other words, it's time to take action now in order to meet those climate goals that we have ahead. However, there is some good news as well. Solutions are available and more affordable. I think some of our team wants to talk about those. And if the building industry can get that right, along with leveraging these technologies, we can all benefit from the rewards of energy efficiency and comfortable buildings. So as the backdrop for today's debate, I'm looking forward to getting some insights on how we can accelerate. Jenna, Vikas, and Vic, welcome again, and let's move on to our discussion. So for our first question, our discussion topic, where are we globally when it comes to developing net zero buildings, and do you already see successful, truly net zero projects around, both globally as well as North America? So Jenna, let you go first.
Sure. And I'm excited to hear my colleagues as well, because they come with such a great global perspective. So thanks for mentioning a lot of those statistics, Michael. I think globally, the world is in a place right now where people realize the need for a rapid transformation of the built environment and of our buildings. And the idea of decarbonization cannot happen without addressing our buildings. Something exciting, I think, a few years ago at the COP26 conference in Glasgow, so the International Climate Conference, where all the countries come together to make climate commitments, but also to report on progress. When everyone was seeing how far we have come since the Paris Agreement was made, it was the first COP conference that buildings had a specific day in focus, because everyone realizes that it's an area that we need to come together around. At that conference, there were a number of breakthrough targets that were announced. And the following year, there was an announcement about a buildings breakthrough. And the idea of that, it was led by France and the Kingdom of Morocco, with encouraging other communities to come on board, or other countries to come on board. And the goal is to make near zero emissions and resilient buildings available, accessible, affordable to everyone by the year 2030. So it sets this international standard, and something that many people are striving for, trying to reach, moving towards. And then on the scale of North America, I think there are a lot of great initiatives as well. One of them that we point to a lot is the 2030 district effort. So there are 2030 districts in over 20 cities in North America, and they bring together existing buildings, because we have to address our existing buildings, and also set higher standards for new buildings. And I think collectively there are over 3,100 buildings committed to 50 to 65% reductions in carbon emissions by 2030. But then to your point, the new goal is how do we accelerate to zero and getting to zero by 2040, or 2030, 2040. Excitingly, Pittsburgh has the largest 2030 district in the world. We have over 1,100 buildings in Western PA committed to those goals. And what makes it so successful is that we help buildings track their performance. So they understand the data of their building, they understand where they want to go, and then they get on a pathway to achieve those goals. So looking at the existing buildings, we want them to get as close to near zero, obviously, but also making sure that any new building that goes into the ground is as near zero carbon or near zero energy as possible. There are wonderful examples, where throughout our region, but also I think across North America, we could probably talk about several of those projects here, but just to name a few, we have an amazing Frick Environmental Center and Phipps Conservatory and Global Links. These are all nonprofit organizations that really have advanced and set the bar of what's possible and have net zero buildings. We also have a fire station in Erie, which is in Northwest PA, that just achieved net zero, which is really exciting because you can see it in many different applications. Housing projects that, go back many years that have also pursued net zero. So I think there are many examples and projects to look to find case studies about it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Vic or Vikas, anything you have there?
I think the most important message, right, that Jenna gave is net zero buildings are here today, right? Net zero carbon buildings are here today. We're not talking buildings of the future or some crazy space technology that we need to get there. We can get there today. We're getting there now, right? So it's something we don't have to wait for, some technological leaps to come in and all those kinds of things. We have the ability to do net zero buildings, whether it's new buildings, new construction, or retrofit. And I think that's really important to know that it's something we can act on straight away, right? There's, if I remember, 6 million or so buildings in the U.S., 120 million residential buildings. So there's a huge foundation of buildings out there that today can get started on improving their energy efficiency. And that's maybe to the point of net zero, right? It's really two sides, right? Net zero means we're using less energy than we're generating. So we're doing some energy generation through solar, through wind, or to have some renewable energy. But I think the critical part is, of course, minimizing the energy use in general, right? I mean, it's not good to just say, let's make tons of solar, right? And then we can just, use as big a system as we want and everything else. So, there's two sides to that coin of net zero: energy production and energy consumption. And I think the drive we have today and the technology we have today to drive energy consumption super low to allow us to get to that net zero number, I think is, something real exciting. I look forward to talking about.
Excellent. Vikas, anything?
I think there's a lot Jenna has shared about what's happening in the US and I would say North America in general. But if I have to a little bit put perspective on global, and I think this is all coming because of the Paris Agreement, as you said, Michael. 195 countries have committed to I would say, the Paris Agreement, and everybody is striving and have an ambition to reduce the global warming by at least 2 degrees, if not, I would say 1.5 degrees. So there's a lot of, I would say, efforts that's being put there. And 2030 is challenging, I would say, from a time frame perspective. But as Vic was saying, this is doable. We have the technologies, we have the solutions. I think Europe has committed, I would say, a lot of money. I would say they have even, I would say, committed more than 790 billion euros as part of their energy and recovery plan, and that goes directly into the, I would say, the energy renovation of existing buildings. I think existing buildings is a big part of the infrastructure that we have everywhere, and without looking at the existing building, I don't think that will achieve this ambition. In Asia, I think where I spent my last 15, 20 years, there's a lot of work that is being done on, I would say, driving towards net zero buildings. And what is different between, I would say, Asia, because there's a lot of emerging and, I would say, developing economies in Asia. So there's a lot of new buildings that are coming in, and they have you can say, an opportunity to have these solutions, the technologies right upfront when they're building these, I would say, the new construction. So there's a lot of head start Asia has over some of the other parts of the world where we have to really go through retrofit. In US, as we know, I would say there are many associations that are helping implement, and one of them is EPA. So EPA is also supporting developing and implementing net zero technologies and solutions. One of the buildings that I personally have seen The net zero building, which is not too far away from here, is in Maryland. So I think we have a lot of examples to share from this part of the country. It is the Unisphere in Maryland. That's the head office or one of the, I would say, one of the companies. And they use a combination of geothermal wells and solar panels. And it's a pretty interesting building. And if any one of you have the chance to go around there and see that, and it's basically generating more energy than it's consuming. So it's a pretty exciting building from outside, but if you have a chance to even go and see inside.
Excellent. Well, there's a lot of good examples, I think, that have been mentioned. Well, let's talk a little bit about the policy aspect here. So what are some of the local policies that impact the journey to net zero buildings? So I'll let you go ahead with that one.
So I think with anything new, and again, I think net zero is still something pretty new, right? We maybe need a little bit of helping hand to push us along, right? And so we're seeing a lot of different things coming right now. So I guess we can look at it kind of sticks and carrots, right? On the policy side, I think two of the big things driving are, one, of course, a constant increase in efficiency requirements at the component level. So we keep seeing, right, if you look for air conditioners for your home recently, you'll see, SEER ratings going from 13 to 14 to 15 and up. And we see that on all the commercial equipment as well. Chillers and rooftop units and so on. We see the efficiency ratings continue to be pushed higher and higher. And that's, of course, to minimize the electricity usage. And we're also seeing transitions to new refrigerants that are much more, much better for the environment, low global warming potential. Something else that we're seeing is from a city as well as a state level, restrictions on the use of natural gas for heating. So typically it's around new construction where the city or the state will ban new construction using natural gas hookups. So meaning that the homes or the buildings will have to be completely heated and cooled using only electricity, right? So that's driving again away from burning fossil fuels, and then obviously we're looking to have renewable energy used to power a lot of those new systems. So those are kind of the requirements that now we have to deal with and have to implement. But then on the positive side, if we talk specifically here in the U.S., we have the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, which is giving incentives to support the increased CapEx requirements on getting this equipment into place. So on the one hand, we're mandating the changes, but the government understands, especially as we're just beginning the upward shift in the curve here, that we're going to need some help to make sure, whether it's the homeowners or whether it's commercial building property owners, that they're able to implement these new technologies. And so there's funding set aside in the IRA to do that.
All right. Vic or Jenna, anything on policies you want to comment on?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can add what I would say Vic was sharing, because I think overall the US has, has a net zero emission target to achieve by 2050. So, and there's a lot of regulatory and I would say legislative support that needs to come to support that initiative. And one of them, which Vic mentioned about the Inflation Reduction Act, there's more than around $400 billion that is being pumped to ensure that we have the technologies and solutions to support that transition. But there's another one which we all know is a bipartisan infrastructure bill that is going to, I would say, invest around $1 trillion over the next 10 years in, I would say, securing the American energy supply chains and generating, I would say, clean energy jobs, reducing the waste. So there's a lot of investments, I would say the administration is, committing as part of the, the long-term goal achievement, which now in 2021, the current administration has signed as part of the Paris Agreement. But there are also, I would say, some states like New York, California, Colorado, they are also have much more ambitious targets. And I think this is also helping the rest of the country to also support and commit to these ambitions. One of the specific laws that I will highlight, and I think which Vic was a little bit alluding to, is Local Law 97. I think this is primarily coming from New York State, which for any new, buildings with more than 25,000 square footage, will have to, a steep reduction in the greenhouse gases and the net zero. So I think there's a lot of regulatory and legislative and capital commitment that is coming as part of the, the regulatory environment. And I believe this will all help us to drive down the energy.
All right. Anything you want to add, Jenna?
We both covered many different aspects. The few things I would add is that it's, we always think about these levers that you need because we do need the policy, but also other incentives to help move these projects forward, especially when they are early on, to just drive down that cost. And local government is really important in helping to move that forward. And just thinking about some of our local examples, the city of Pittsburgh has a near zero energy ready goal for the buildings in Pittsburgh. We also have a great municipality, Forest Hills, that's right outside of the city, that built a net zero energy municipal building and has a net zero energy goal for their whole municipality. So sometimes, it's important for us to think about the government on many different levels, state, obviously important, and federal. And the two big bills you both mentioned, which I heard a government official say Bill and IRA, which just is easier than repeating it, every time. But Bill and IRA, the one thing we talk to a lot of our community and stakeholders about is that we hear all the time unprecedented amount of money coming forward to actually address our buildings and our built environment, to make it healthy and efficient and near zero. So that is very exciting to know that the investment is also coming.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all. Well, Vic, there's obviously a lot of good things coming, but you touched on a couple challenges. So let's open that one up a little bit. What do you think are some of the most common challenges that people encounter in developing these net zero buildings? And maybe Vic, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I guess it maybe depends a bit if we're talking new construction or renovation, right? Because obviously, if you're doing renovation, you're working with a fixed foundation, fixed infrastructure, and so then you really are quite limited in what you can do, right? So you need to make sure everything fits within that space. So that adds one extra layer of anything when it comes to trying to get your building down to net zero. But I think maybe we look at it two ways. One, CapEx in general, right? To Jenna's point, it really is, it's technology that's out there, but we're still in the ramp up stages. So we know there's going to be some additional costs associated with getting some of these technologies put into the building and everything working together. But we have those offsets in the Inflation Reduction Act and so on. So, what was a roadblock maybe in the past when people were looking to do maybe the right thing, now seems to be something a bit less of a concern. And I think the other challenge is really, we can maybe call it thinking outside the box, right? It's not just about brute force and, today I've got a rooftop and I'm just going to put in that more efficient rooftop. I've got a chiller, I'm going to put in a more efficient chiller, whatever it is, and just kind of force the energy consumption down. A lot of the technologies today, right, we're running super efficient as it is, right? And there's going to be incremental costs if we want to make them, step change more efficient. So we really have to think about the whole building envelope. So it's how that chiller is working with the fan coils or the air handlers, and how the system is balanced, and how do we have insulation, and do we have, well insulated windows? And we really need to take a holistic approach to reduce the overall energy requirements on the building. And that's, of course, when you're designing a new building, that's quite simple. It's something you can do, in the early stages of the design. When you do have a retrofit, right, some of these things can become a lot more expensive, and then it becomes a matter of trade-offs, right? Where can you get the biggest efficiency bang for your buck?
Sure. Okay. Vikas or Jenna, anything to add?
So I think Vic mentioned, I would say, a couple of, key themes. One of them, of course, is investments. And I think with these bills, this is really helping drive the availability of the funding towards that. But one of the couple of other themes that I believe is also impacting us in our, you can say, fast ramp up or acceleration in this. And one of them is the involvement of private corporations. Mm-hmm. Even though the government is coming up, the administration is coming up and supporting that, the private contribution is to a certain extent still limited. And this is, of course, limited because of the availability of funding, the capital, the cost of capital, the tax incentives, the other. And the more we can involve the private corporations, the faster acceleration we will see in the ramp up there. The other I would say topic which is also worth, I would say, evaluating and debating is the understanding of technologies and solutions. And I think it all starts way back in our college education, our school education, because I think the technology has evolved so much in the last few years that what we are teaching kids in the college and how much they understand the technologies and solution, and as they graduate, how much they're bringing this knowledge in their design and in architects and in construction materials. I think there's a lot of work to be done there, and I believe the more we invest in the education areas around the understanding of knowledge, I think it will also go a long way in ramping up faster.
That's a great point on the education piece. So, Jenna,
Yeah,
anything?
because I love that. I was thinking, a lot of the work that we do at GBA, we are obviously thinking about the best strategies and innovation and technology, but the reason why we even care about any of this is because of people. I mean, people are the people occupy buildings, and so how are we designing the best places for people? But thinking about the whole spectrum of the human side of it, it's, convincing an owner, regardless of what sector they're in, maybe it's a homeowner or a private company, as you had mentioned, or, your local government, higher education, a K through 12 school. How do you convince the owner that they want to make a decision and do these investments and create a healthier, more efficient, near zero building? And then it's the whole people supply chain of that. So having an educated workforce and really investing in workforce development, starting from high school through CTEs, community colleges, but higher education, but also the folks who are already in the profession. We often are designing great buildings or making these investments, and then we need to make sure that the people who occupy them, or even the facilities team who operate and maintain them on a daily basis, know how to do that as we continue to innovate and evolve. So great points.
Excellent. Great inputs, everybody. Well, let's bring this down a little bit to a specific project or at a project level. And how do we ensure that we get net zero or as close as possible to that in these projects? And maybe you can talk a little bit about specific technologies that are used, or maybe it's stricter regulations, but how do we ensure that at a project level? All the great backdrop we've got so far here.
Yeah, maybe I'll start, but you guys should, I'm looking at both of you because I know you have, they are experts in the technology side, but I think for a project, as we had mentioned previously, getting people to come together at the beginning around a greater goal, an ambitious goal, especially if it is near zero energy, that setting that goalpost and establishing the goals early on and upfront is really important. And to the point earlier about the holistic side of buildings, one of the key principles of green building is integrative design. And so how do you get everyone around the table early on and even throughout the process so that everyone is aligned around those goals and we understand how one decision impacts another? Energy modeling is also obviously very important. And I would say tracking the data and performance over time so that behavior can be adjusted, investments can be changed, so that you're really understanding, your building almost as like a living, interacting thing with the people who occupy that space. I think those are very soft sides of the early on types of aspects. But you also mentioned some technology and other things, which I think you both might dive into. But we are seeing a lot of push for electrification and digitalization. We also think a lot about how are all of the advancements in AI and many other things going to impact how we create smart buildings and more interactive buildings as we move forward. So those are high level, but I can dive deeper into some of the technology after you guys.
I think, Jenna, you have mentioned, I think, most of them. But if I have to refer, I would say, to World Economic Forum, they actually came up in 2020, I would say, with 4 clear, I would say, areas that can help drive, I would say, the net zero. And one of them, of course, is the decarbonization of the electric grid. I think that's where it starts from. And I think there's a lot of work being done, whether it's geothermal, whether it's solar, whether it's wind energy. How can we really harness these renewable, energies to decarbonize our grid? The second area they highlighted was the electrification of the building space and I would say the heating space. And here we have technologies like heat pumps, which is really I would say gaining speed now in this period where the natural gas is also becoming more costly. So the electrification of the space is also really important. And then we have, I would say, a wide range of energy efficient solutions and technologies that if you have a chiller, or if you have a air conditioning unit, if you have a heating unit, how can you, I would say, make that more energy efficient and really driving down the, I would say, the energy demand. And then I think that the last one, Jenna, which you mentioned about digital, I would say, element. I think there's a lot of new smart technology. There's not a lot of AI that is coming in. I believe that we can harness that in helping become more net zero. But these are the 4 areas that I see really help us to reach that goal.
You mentioned AI. Just a disclaimer: there's no AI today. We're all here. we're live, and I think all our answers are live, so and original. So thank you. Just it's becoming.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think you both, Vikas and Jenna, brought up a really good point. What I really like, I mean, the technology is fantastic, and there's a lot of smart things happening, but I think if it didn't start with the pull from the end users, which I think is fairly new, right? I mean, for the longest time, it was the government pushing, right, saying we need to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, or we need to electrify. And it was more, it felt like the, governments pushing solutions, onto the marketplace. But now the more you talk to, real estate companies, the more you talk to, end users and building owners, occupiers, they're pulling the demand for net zero buildings, right? So, and that has created such a shift in the momentum, right? It's so much easier to have people sit around the table and talk about how do we get this building net zero when everybody's involved and invested in getting the solution down in the first place. And that's something I think in these past a few years, maybe, during those COVID era and all that kind of stuff, people had a chance to reflect a little bit, while we were all locked up in our houses. But that I've really seen a big shift there. And I think, I know sorry, Michael, the question was on technology, but I really think that was, if we want to look what's driving, more net zero buildings, it's not the fact that we have a new widget out there that we can suddenly, right, get free energy, right? And nuclear fusion or something. It's really demand in the market pulling it, I think, has been really driving this for the last few years.
Okay. Excellent.
Vic, can I add to that really quickly? Just an example, because, the idea, like, do we need stricter regulations? And I think one that I love to point to a lot is the Pittsburgh 2030 district, because throughout the whole region, 1,100 building owners across every sector committed to these large goals. And we've tracked the data on it. They're coming out of, it's a voluntary program. It's making a decision and wanting to move forward, but understanding there are real positive benefits of that. So collectively over the last 10 years, or maybe it's 11 years, these numbers, they've saved nearly $400 million in utility costs. So there's a financial side of that. We also know they've invested over $2.3 billion to improve their buildings. And collectively, they're close to almost 45% reduction in carbon emissions. And so it's again, that point of data driving the investment, but it also helps change the end user's interest in wanting to move it forward. And how the market has changed over the last few years, we realize buildings are intricately connected to our entire economic system. Yeah. So there's a lot of incentive for sure. Moving things forward.
And you've mentioned the 2030 in Pittsburgh. So for our audience, we'll give you some reference information at the end on how to get into that and see more of that. So that's coming. And speaking of our audience, a large majority of our audience is HVAC consulting engineers, designers, system integrators, amongst others. And so thank you all for tuning in today. So let's talk a little bit about those roles. How do you see the role of HVAC consultancies and consultants in general, designers, system integrators, those guys that participate in the design and execution of a building? Vic?
So I think you mentioned in the introduction, Michael, right, that 40% of the energy worldwide is used in buildings, right? I don't know if you mentioned it or not, but 40% of the energy in buildings is used for HVAC, right? So we're talking 15 to 20% of the global energy consumption is being used in HVAC. So it is a absolutely critical part of the energy ecosystem that we address, right? I mean, we hear a lot about electric cars and aircraft and long distance shipping and those stuff, but 15 to 20% of the global energy being used in commercial buildings is huge. So all those HVAC consultants, contractors, engineers out there, right? I mean, the focus is on you guys to work to get these buildings down to net zero, because that is, I think, far and away one of the biggest levers we have to pull to get our energy consumption down. What can they specifically do? Honestly, I think we have, as I talk to the different consultants, contractors, and so on, great people working in this industry today, right? I mean, we have dedicated people with people who are super passionate also about, reaching net zero. So let's keep doing what we're doing out there. But to Jenna's point, right? As the technology was getting more and more advanced, we need to make sure we keep up with the training. I think, Vikas, you mentioned education too, right? The days of servicing systems with a torch and a wrench are probably over, right? Maybe you need still a torch and a wrench, but you definitely need your laptop or your smartphone and a few other tools in there. Systems are getting more and more complicated, so we need to make sure we're staying on top of the technology. The technology and the innovation curve is skyrocketing, so we need to make sure we stay on top of all these developments as they're coming, so that we can implement them into those buildings. And then, of course, the individual technologies are important. But it's getting that whole ecosystem in the building to work well together, to have it connected and to have it be optimized. So, I think fantastic work ongoing. Let's go full speed ahead, and let's just make sure we're innovating and using those new technologies.
Excellent. Vic or Jenna, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Vic has mentioned there's a lot of work that is already happening, I would say, by this community, this sector of, I would say there's a lot of knowledge and there's a lot of skill that is already available in this sector, and I believe we just need to continue. There are a couple of things that comes to my mind because, as Vic mentioned, I would say HVAC plays such a key part of, decarbonizing our buildings, that whatever new technologies and new solutions that we can bring in, that's going to go in that direction. One thing that is really, evolving and shifting, in the last few years is post-COVID is the utilization of these commercial buildings. We have clearly seen that there's a big change and shift in how the people are coming back in these commercial buildings, how the load is, then the demand in these commercial buildings. To a large extent, the buildings were designed pre-COVID era with, having at some point of time 70 to 80% occupancy. But we have seen now post-COVID, the occupancy in many of these buildings has not come back to that level. So simulating and analyzing the load demand, maybe in changing times, and how can be more agile and flexible, and ensuring that our load demand can adjust, or our HVAC solutions can adjust according to the load demand. Then I think the other point, which we have also discussed previously, is the source of the energy. Nations, a lot of corporations, including Danfoss, they have all committed to net zero, to decarbonizing our own operations. And this is a bold mission that we are making also as part of science-based targets. So if we are committing to that, we also have to reflect that where are we drawing energy? Are we drawing energy from electric grid, or are we drawing energy from a renewable grid? So looking at our own operations, looking at our own factories, looking at our own buildings, I think that also goes, a long way. And lastly, I think this is also shifting, and this is, I believe, our consulting engineers and system integrators, they know it very well, that how the energy is flowing within the building. Because I think we talked about technologies and solutions, because today we need, energy in this area, and tomorrow we need energy in different area of the building. So the flow of energy is also contributing a lot in driving down to net zero. So I think this community plays a very critical role, and I believe the role is going to be much more enhanced as we move along. And we look forward to, working alongside many of these stakeholders.
Excellent. Great points. Some great points there. Jenna, anything to wrap that one up?
No.
Okay.
I think the experts next week.
But I do think with with this kind of being a new technology, new trends coming into the marketplace, that for all the consulting engineers out there, this is the perfect opportunity to take a market lead, right? There's still voids that can be filled. Not everybody is moving at the same pace on designing net zero buildings, right? A lot of companies are still going to be doing what we've been doing in the past, and so for those organizations out there that are really interested, I mean, look at this also as, I think, a huge business opportunity to kind of take a leadership role in this segment and can really propel yourselves moving forward.
Yeah. Well, great segue into my next question area. So, breakthrough and key trends, right? Always an area that engineers, designers are excited about. So let's see if we can talk to that a little bit. What are some of the breakthrough or key trends that come to mind in addition to what we've talked about, or maybe you want to highlight something we've already touched on? But Jenna, you want to see what comes to mind?
The one thing I was going to add, really, when you had said it's an opportunity for folks here, pulling back in the fact that also the Bill and IRA funding and many other types of funding, people can address their HVAC systems and then have a great return on their investment. So it is just an opportune time. Many of the breakthroughs, I feel like we've discussed a lot about them, just how we are transitioning our buildings to making them smart buildings. Even the idea of grid interactive buildings, as we're cleaning the grid, how do we create grid interactive buildings? I think that that's something that people are really looking towards. And when you think about our existing building stock and the desire to bring more renewable energy onto the grid, we have to start thinking about our buildings as energy generators. I think that that's going to be something that will lead us forward, and maybe people will go beyond net zero into net positive. The other, I would say, breakthrough areas when people are considering the whole net zero carbon aspect of their buildings, really thinking about the embodied carbon of everything they're doing within their building, whether it's an existing building or a retrofit project. And that brings in a whole new world of the products and supply chain. And I think that that's going to be absolutely critical as we move forward. One thing I am really excited about, I had mentioned our partnership with the United Nations. The UN Economic Commission for Europe is leading a team in a project that's being funded by the German government out of their International Climate Initiative, all focused on the products and supply chain we need to achieve high performance buildings, because we actually won't get there to this idea of near zero without the products and supply chain that we need. And so we realize that's a global need, and GBA is really excited to be part of that project that's kicking off. And companies like Danfoss are critical to that solution. So those are some of the breakthroughs. The other thing I think is on data. People are realizing the performance of the data in their building and how to understand it better, and then how do you interact with the building and the occupants because of that data and continue to drive investment. So those are some of the things I was thinking about.
Vikas or Vic?
I think we have discussed quite a bit, I would say, these new breakthrough trends. I think there are a couple of them which I will add on what Jenna said. One of them is, I would say, certifications, because I think certifications goes a long way in helping certify a building in their ability to achieve net zero emissions. And I think there's a work a lot of associations are doing, I would say, in certifying. But other than that, I would say the carbon strategies, the utility, I would say, management, facility management, waste management. I think there's a lot of areas in the building that can contribute towards reducing the energy footprint, reducing the carbon footprint, and I think there's a lot of technology and solutions already available, which could be harnessed and could be leveraged to really achieve that, I would say, net zero. So I think we have discussed quite a bit, but there are also a lot of them also available on top of that, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and maybe it's not new technologies, but it's certainly technology that's being applied a lot more. We see a lot more use and reuse of waste heat. We're so used to seeing chillers or rooftops, cooling towers, just ejecting all this hot air into the atmosphere, right? And that hot air is energy, right? And so we're just taking the heat out of the building and just dumping it into the atmosphere. And while it's always been, the technology has always been there, it's just becoming a lot more, I think, financially viable, where we can do a lot more waste heat recovery, especially in places like hotels, hospitals, airports, places that have a constant demand for hot water. We can capture that heat, reuse it, and save the needs to do any kind of hot water heating. Sector coupling is also something we see a lot about, and that's maybe connecting some buildings together. And again, it's about moving energy to where it needs to be, right? Where is it generated, right? Maybe your condenser on the chiller or whatever it is, and where can we use that energy? So it's, I think, really important to look what we can do with that energy rather than just dumping it up into the atmosphere. And we're seeing a bit of an uptick too, maybe not so much in the US yet, but certainly in Europe on district energy stations. So, right, it's kind of about your thermal economies of scale, building big systems, maybe campus wide or apartment complex wide, and doing all of your heating and cooling in one location and then distributing it throughout the building. And we're able to have systems run much more efficiently that way. And then I think we've talked mostly about commercial buildings now, but, on the residential side, there's also a lot moving. Heat pumps becoming more and more important. We're typically in that, 70-30 range, air conditioning to heat pumps, but we see that ratio on residents ticking up, more and more people moving to heat pumps in the residential sector. We have the cold climate heat pump challenge where we're getting, heat pumps that are running down to 100% capacity at 5 degrees ambient. So I think there's a lot of technology moving out there. And then when it comes to smarts, it really, I think, starts, right? We're used to seeing things on the B2C side of things, right? We all have our smartphone and we can talk to our thermostats and do that kind of stuff in the house. And that's really where the technology started, right? So we're able to see what our home is doing, right? Our HVAC system for sure. And these days you can check your refrigerator and stove and dishwasher and so on. And that technology, we've kind of become accustomed to it, right? And if I can see what my, air conditioning is doing at home, why can't I check what's doing in the office? So that move to smarts, I think, was driven a lot by the residential side, and now we see that coming commercial as well.
Okay. So, and you really went towards this, Vic, so thank you. And a lot of these technologies are available today or almost available or maturing, maybe we could say also. How about if we look a little bit farther into the future? Any thoughts on future HVAC systems? Maybe we're not quite there yet. It's still on the drawing board. Any thoughts or comments for the audience on that?
So I think, as I said, we've kind of become spoiled on the consumer side of things, expecting everything to be connected and at our fingertips on our phone. And I think we'll see that moving more and more as we move on to the commercial side of things. And I really think if we're going to have the next step change in efficiency, which again all comes back to making sure we're using as little energy as possible to get our net zero buildings, it has to be about connecting those components. It has to be about knowing what's happening in the system. The manufacturers today building those chillers and rooftops are doing a fantastic job of squeezing every BTU we can out of it using the least amount of energy possible. But we're limited, right? When you have a unit, it's air in one side, air out the other, water in, water out. And to really optimize that across your whole building, right? Then we need to know what's happening on that 10th floor, right? And tell that chiller what's happening right ahead of time so we can, adjust speeds and adjust flow rates and do all those things right and really make that whole building operate. And with the, AI and the smart technologies today, know it's going to be a cloudy day today, right? Or it's going to be a sunny day or whatever it is. And we can adjust adjust the windows as needed and adjust the capacity on the units and do predictive things that are going to make sure we're not, continuously chasing a temperature setting, but that we're, kind of predicting where the temperature setting will need to be, running at that setting and minimizing the energy consumption.
Okay. Vikas or Jenna, anything to add about maybe a little farther in the future here? Or?
Yeah, one of the things I think we have now starting to talk about, I would say, smart units and digitalization. And digitalization is also, I would say, a big part of our focus in Danfoss. I think we believe, I would say, the digitalization and smart tools will help to simulate and optimize our HVAC units. Because I think as we now design a building, as we build the building, and how the load demand will fluctuate and evolve, having the ability to simulate before constructing that building. And I think that goes a long way in really already, I would say, ensuring that we have the right tools and the right technologies already empowering that I would say the building. So digitalization will play a very big part, I would say, in the future buildings. So it's already there in our residential. It's already there in our lives. But how can we utilize I would say, the digital tools, not only simulate, and then also not only optimize I would say the energy consumption, but also optimize the cost associated with the energy.
Okay. Jen, any last comments on that one?
I think that you both covered it very well, that the digitalization and also that interaction with the human factor is going to be key. And, future, it's smarter than sometimes what we can imagine it's going to be right now. And the grid interactivity of the buildings. And Vic, you had mentioned something earlier about not just thinking about an individual building by itself, but a collection of buildings. So how are we thinking about, a community scale type system that is connected to each other and talking to each other, a city scale? And that's sort of where we need to go to collectively reach our goals, because not every building is going to achieve near zero or net zero, but collectively we could likely make huge progress. So,
okay, excellent. Well, here comes the tough questions. These are questions from the audience. So thank you, audience, for those that have submitted. And we're going to try to read off a few of those here. So this first one, to what extent is preventative maintenance such as coil cleaning, filter replacement, and the like being stressed for HVAC cooling equipment as a strategy to cut unneeded power plant emissions?
Yeah, so that I think maybe there's two parts to the answer. One, it's absolutely being stressed. I think every contractor you talk to, every building owner you talk to has a preventative maintenance schedule, right, and a plan. How often is it always followed to the T? Maybe is a different answer, right? Because, let's skip this, whatever this quarter, right? We don't quite have the budget. We'll save a few dollars, whatever it is. I know there's been some testing on the level of efficiency loss as, say, your evaporator or condenser gets plugged, right? And so we can chart and see the performance of the unit degrade as, filters are plugged or coils are plugged and, pipes are needing to be cleaned, heat exchangers plugged. So we know there's a degradation. I think all the manufacturers have suggested maintenance schedules. And I think we're good at putting those schedules in place. Maybe not the best at always following those schedules right now.
Okay. Any other comments from either of you?
No, I think there's schedules already available, but I think the technology is also helping now, I would say, popping reminders for building owners and I would say technicians to really, I would say, go and replace, I would say, filter and clean, I would say, coil. Because I think we can all agree here that if done properly, this also goes a long way in, I would say, reducing the energy and the carbon footprint in a building. And if we skip the schedules, as you said, Vic, of course, this is going a little bit on the backward direction. But yeah, there's two tools available, there's schedules available, but there are also technologies now helping, you can say, automate some of these, I would say, regular activities.
And I'm laughing because I just got my home air filter alert.
Okay.
I'll change mine. Anything else to add there, Jenna?
I think preventative maintenance has one of the largest paybacks, but again, some of the other barriers we discussed earlier keep it from happening, whether it's, knowledge or practice of the person who's operating that building, but really time and capacity. Like deferred maintenance happens in a lot of places and for a lot of buildings and sectors, and it's one of the areas that we try to stress and focus on a lot.
Okay.
But I think Vikas did bring up a good point, though, as technology's coming. It's not anymore the every 60 days change your filter, every 90 days. Like that, right? I mean, we can now see, right, a unit and know, whatever, right? Superheat is creeping up. So we know that you've got a plugged condenser. So you should go take a look at it, right? Or the frequency converter is sensing that the motor windings are getting hot and, right, maybe the motor's not running as efficiently as it can. So there is a lot of technology out there that's helping us not just do stuff based on a calendar, but really telling us, giving us kind of a, fault detection right before we're having the fault and not just a failure for downtime, but also from an efficiency standpoint. So I think technologies help a lot there also, right?
Okay. Let's see if we can get a couple more in, or at least maybe one more before we run out of time. But this one came in. What % of the U.S. buildings go through retrofit or deep retrofit annually?
The last number I heard for retrofits in general is almost 2%. And I heard deep retrofits, and now I'm trying to remember if this was a U.S. number or not. Don't quote me on it, but was less than 10% of the total retrofit. So if we say 2% are retrofit, maybe 0.2% are getting the deep retrofit. I know that's been a big push in Europe. They're looking to raise the deep retrofits. I think they want to get that over 2%. But today, in general, the buildings are going about 2%. And that's commercial buildings specifically there.
Okay. Another one here. What is the best approach to achieve real change? Should we look beyond individual organizations taking action and more into wider industry collaborations? I think we touched on it, but maybe if you want to add anything.
No, I think it's as I think the answer is in the question. I think that the collaboration, I would say, is the way to go. And I think there's no single association, there's no single entity, there's no single community that can help achieve this goal that I would say US and many other countries has committed to, I would say, as part of the Paris Agreement. So I think there's a place for administration, there's a place for governments, local governments, there's a place for private companies, there's a place for associations. So I think we all have to come together and I would say pitch in our knowledge, our skills, our investment, our ability to contribute towards to this, I would say, greater, I would say, good that we can all contribute towards and leave, I would say, a better, I would say, space for our kids and our grandkids. So
we definitely need a multi-sector approach. I very much agree with that, and public-private partnerships, and every person is impacted by this. So I think more and more people are coming to the table, to both your points earlier, willingly and want to move forward. So it's always going to be that push and pull for supply and demand of near zero energy buildings, and also thinking about the levers. Like when some of these levers aren't working anymore, how do we start to think more strategically about others? But that requires a lot of people at the table working together.
All right. Well, I think it's about time we wrap up here. So I want to say it's been inspiring and energizing talking to everybody here. And I think we can see the personal passion you all have for this area. As a key takeaway from our panel discussion today, we've learned there's still a way to go in achieving net zero buildings, but the industry is preparing and is on the right path. Together with strong political choices, we see a future where energy consumption and carbon emissions from buildings like offices, hotels, and data centers, as well as multi-residential buildings, will decrease. So thank you once again, Jenna, Vikas, and Vic, for sharing your insights with us, and also to you, our audience, for tuning in today. We are happy to support your needs and journey to net zero buildings, so please reach out to Danfoss for further information. And as we mentioned before, thanks for all the great work to the Green Building Alliance and your organization, Jenna. And if you'd like to learn more about what's going on with 2030 with Pittsburgh and with the Green Building Alliance, go to www.gba.org and you can learn more there. So one last note, stay tuned for our next Rethink Live session. That'll be happening next Thursday, September 14th at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And that's it from us today. Thanks for attending and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.